Hey, welcome to another episode of Leader Feeder. I am Kirk. I'm the General Manager at Unique Training and Development and Frontline Leadership Systems. And before we talk about today's topic, which is going to be how to turn the available into the capable, I just want to give a little shout out to our public workshop that's happening coming up in April. It's coming up really fast. So if you have frontline leaders that are interested in learning all about the basics of leadership, how to strengthen some of those essentials like managing conflict, giving constructive feedback, how to effectively communicate with their team, how to be a great ambassador for their team, but also for management, and lots of other really wonderful foundational skills, then you want to get them in that workshop. Maybe you've got 2 or 3 leaders, or maybe even a couple more. We do offer a discount if you enroll more than 3 leaders, 3 or more leaders in that program. So you can find out more about that public workshop happening in April on uniquedevelopment.com. Uniquedevelopment.com, that's where you want to go. Okay. So let's talk about how to turn the available into the capable. And what do we even mean by that? So a lot of manufacturing companies right now are looking to hire people, and in some cases, they're looking to hire people because they have high turnover, meaning that they bring new people in, but then those people don't stick around. And what can often happen in that churning is that they go through the candidates or the applicants that have a bit of manufacturing experience or on-the-floor production experience pretty quickly. And what they're left with are candidates that maybe are interested or candidates that are at least applying, but they don't have manufacturing experience. They don't have production experience. And so that's what we're talking about when we say the available, turning the available into the capable. Because now as the frontline leader, the leader of one of these teams, you're getting people being hired that have really no manufacturing experience, and you've got to get them up to snuff and get them doing their job and meeting production quotas as quickly as possible. So in today's episode, I want to talk about a couple of strategies that you can use and effective things you can do in order to take them from being available to capable, and not only capable, but people that enjoy, hopefully, being on the team and that stick around so that we're not going through that churn and that high turnover that we know a lot of our, well, not a lot, some of our manufacturing clients are working with right now. The first thing I'd recommend is actually putting a training plan in place. Now that might sound a little bit daunting. You might think like, hey, isn't that something that HR is supposed to do? I don't really know anything about that. And that it's going to be some 45-page document with a whole bunch of SOPs. But a training plan doesn't have to be this really formalized, really long, detailed document. A training plan basically says something to this effect. Okay, they're going to start on week 1, and I think that they should be learning these couple things in week 1. I expect them to be able to learn these couple of things in week 2, these couple of things in week 3. And importantly, what you also want to make sure that training plan has, again, we're thinking of a more, informal, just kind of basic training plan. What do you want them to learn? And what outcome are you looking for at the end? So here's what I would expect them to learn in week 1. Here's the outcome at the end of week 1, or here's what I would expect them to be able to do by the end of week 1. So what task would they be able to do independently by the end of week 1, if any? Maybe they're in a certain environment where it's going to take at least a couple of weeks before they're expected to do much on their own. Now, this is where your expertise as the frontline leader comes in. You've been through some of these processes before. If you were an operator that was promoted to a frontline leader, then you used to run some of this equipment or some of this machinery. You were part of this process, and maybe you still are. Maybe you're an on-the-floor leader. So hey, what's realistic to expect in their first week? Should they really be able to manage a machine on their own? Should they have a process already nailed down by the end of their first week? So think about your own experience. Think about the experience of your coworkers, and now of the team that you lead. How quickly should they be able to do some of these different actions or take on some of these tasks? So what should they be able to do in week 1, week 2, week 3, right, at the end of the week? So that's going to form the basis of your training plan. Essentially, what am I going to teach them in that week, or what are they going to work on, and what do I expect them to know or do by the end of that week? Pretty straightforward. It doesn't have to be a really scientific or complex document, okay? So that's the first part. Actually take the time to make that simplified or basic training plan, okay? The other thing is think about who should be training them. In a lot of cases, we use the buddy system. We go, Derek, you've been working on this thing for years. You know it better than anybody. I want you to work with Linda, the new person. I want you to think carefully about Derek. Is Derek the right person to be teaching someone, especially this new person, Linda, on this new machine? You might think, well, Derek's been around forever. Well, things do change over time, and we want to make sure that Derek still has kind of the recent information that he needs in order to teach Linda the current way of doing things. One of the downfalls of using someone that's been around for a long time is sometimes they haven't adapted to the newer ways of doing things as easily as some newer employees. So that's one thing to think about. The other thing is, if Derek is really proficient at something, meaning he's really good at it, maybe he's actually not the best teacher. Because sometimes the better teachers for something are people who struggled a little bit with it themselves, kind of had to learn the hard way themselves, because then they're better at explaining it than someone who kind of just mastered it right from the get-go. Now, none of those things are reasons that Derek shouldn't necessarily be the trainer, but I don't want you to default to the most experienced or the most senior person should automatically be the trainer. It really should be the person that you feel is going to teach it, that task or that assignment or that job or that machine, who can teach it the best. And that might actually be one of your newer employees or someone that doesn't have as much experience, but is maybe more calm, more patient, is better at explaining things. So think carefully about not only what the training plan looks like, but who is going to teach the different tasks on that thing. Here's the other little note with that. Just because you're the leader, it doesn't mean you have to do all of the teaching or the training. For the same reason, you might not be the best person at using that piece of equipment. You might not be the best person at explaining how something works. And so leverage the the wisdom and the experience and the knowledge and the expertise of the people on your team, and don't assume that you have to do it all as the leader. So that's talking about kind of how do we get them up to snuff with the tasks that they need to do, the work that they need to do, so that we can ensure that we're meeting our production goals as quickly as possible. But let's also talk about that person and as a member of a new team and in a new organization. Whether they're coming brand new from outside or whether they're coming from a different department, although typically if they're coming from another department within your organization, they'll have at least a bit of basic knowledge which will help them learn a bit faster. But especially if they're a brand new person, they've never worked for the organization before, you want to make sure that you make them feel welcome on the team. You want to make sure some small things, like, for example, using their name as much as possible, or in your first team huddle that person is part of, making sure you say, hey, everyone, I want to take a minute to introduce Suzanne. She's our newest member on the team. She's going to be working on line C. I'd love everybody to take a minute to say hello to her and welcome her to the team. We were recently working with a client in Michigan, and we brought up this strategy, and it was a really great chance to have a conversation because we had people in the room that said, yeah, I typically do this. This is kind of what I do. And those leaders that tended to do some of these things just by their very nature, I suppose, or by experience, tended to have the stronger teams. And the ones that said, oh, I don't really take much time to welcome the new person. They just kind of assimilate and it's kind of fine and it goes okay. They did tend to see a bit more turnover, and they didn't have teams that were quite as tight or as strong. And so I know that's only one client. I'm not saying we're scientifically proving anything here, but I think it stands to reason that if someone is made to feel welcome by a few proactive gestures of the leader, again, making sure that everybody knows their name on that first day, even things as small as when it comes to be lunchtime or break time, is someone on your team that's more experienced or more veteran taking a moment to say, hey, why don't you sit with me today? I know there's a lot of room in the cafeteria. It can be a little bit like the first day of high school, and nobody wants that feeling all over again. So, come sit with us, rather than leaving them to their own devices. That's not necessarily going to make them do the work any better. It's not going to make them proficient any faster. So it doesn't necessarily affect the work that they do. But what it does affect is how they feel about the job, how they feel about the team, how they feel about the organization. Sometimes we think that as the frontline leader, we might not have a lot of responsibility in this aspect, or that it's not really our job to see them feel welcome because, hey, we have these awesome, what we call words on the wall. The mission, vision, and values talk about making employees feel welcome, and every employee is valued. And so we think because that's coming from maybe the higher ups, well, that's not really our job as the leader, but it actually is our job as the leader. As the leader of the team, they spend way more time with us and the people on the team than they ever do with the CEO or any VPs or plant manager or anything like that. So it's important as a leader that we understand our role in helping someone feel welcome on our team. And all it can be is something as simple as making sure the team, making sure we introduce that person on the first day and maybe even the second or third day, depending on the size of the team, because people can get lost in the shuffle. Taking the time to check in with them, making sure they're not sitting all by themselves at lunch. Some of those small things can go a really long way. Now, once you've gotten through that training plan and it's been a couple of weeks and they're, finding a certain amount of success, they're feeling welcome on the team because you've asked the team to try to integrate them and make them feel welcome, it doesn't stop there. Just because someone goes 3 or 4 weeks and they're no longer new anymore, it doesn't mean that we can just completely forget or not consider them a new member of the team. I mean, depending on the organization, depending on the specific role that they have, it could be really months or maybe even a year before they're really kind of a member of the team that they don't feel new and they've kind of been through all of the different cycles that you go through in a year in your facility. So what I think is important once the initial training plan is kind of finished and we've checked all those boxes, right? And the team has taken the time to make them feel welcome and make them feel like a valued member of the team, it's still important to check in with them regularly. Now, maybe that's every week at the in fact, in the very, very beginning, it should be almost daily, and then move to probably weekly and then maybe monthly after that. But make sure you're having those check-ins, pulling them aside just to say, hey, I know it's, just the end of month 3. Might seem like, everything is the way it is and you might not have any questions, but I wanted to check in with you and see if that is the case. I didn't want to assume you didn't have any questions. I wanted to ask you. So having any challenges I can help you deal with. This is our really busy season. This is your first time experiencing that. I know that can be overwhelming. How are you feeling through all this, right? How are you coping through everything? So it's a great reminder that just because someone's been around for a month or 2 months, it doesn't necessarily mean that they have all the answers and they've got it all figured out and they don't still need that support from you as the leader. So really beneficial to take a moment to check in continually, especially through that first kind of 90 days, 180 days, and so on. So there's a couple tips for you. Take a little bit of time to put together an informal or a basic training plan, and that's going to basically consist of what you want to cover in each week of their work there, and also what outcomes you see. So here's what we're going to train you on, and here's what we expect you to be able to do or to know or to operate by the end of each week. And then we talked about who should train that person. Who's the right person to train them on each one of those different tasks? You as the leader will sometimes be the right person, and in other cases it'll be someone that's really proficient on a certain machine or has a lot of knowledge that they're able to share with that team member. We also want to think about, are they patient? Are they calm? Are they really going to be the right person to train someone else? And then, of course, we also talked about moving away from the work that person's doing to thinking about the person that's doing the work, making them feel welcome on the team so that they have a positive first impression. And, very soon in, they're going, I felt welcomed. I felt, a member of the team quicker and definitely not feeling kind of left out in the cold. So all of those things are going to help create a really positive and much better onboarding experience. And if you're in an organization that's dealing with a lot of churn, a lot of turnover, this will definitely help reduce that a little bit. And, hopefully management's going to see the positive things you're doing on the team, and that'll get highlighted for you as well. And there you have it. So a couple of practical tips to stop that churn on your team and increase the engagement and retention on your team. I hope you found that helpful. I'm always looking for feedback and suggestions on if you've tried these things and how they've worked and what you had to tweak or change. Again, leadership is one big experiment that we're all kind of dealing with in the day-to-day. And so I'd love to hear, again, what you're thinking about this and how you've tried this in the past and what's worked for you. So, and then once you've thought about that and you're thinking about even more about foundational leadership and trying to build the leadership in your organization, maybe you want to contact us and have a conversation about topics like managing conflict effectively or giving effective and constructive feedback. And you can do that. That starts by heading to our website at uniquedevelopment.com, and we can schedule a conversation, and we would love to hear from you. Until then, I wish you well. Take care.